Hello everyone, Mohammed On here. Quick introduction. I am a senior technology consultant, been working in the North American, European, and Gulf markets for 15 plus years, implementing technology solutions to improve business processes. As we speak, technology is just not limited to improving business processes. It's actually powering a genocide in Palestine. So today's presentation, I'm going to be talking in depth about the role of technology companies in powering the genocide in Palestine. And just for clarification purposes, when I say Palestine, I'm going to be talking about technologies which are employed in Gaza to perform the damage that has happened in the last 2 years or so, as well as before that. And then also West Bank, as well as the potential that it holds to further cause damage in the Middle East and possibly globally as well, if it is not regulated or controlled through regulations, etc. Quickly going through the agenda, I have a couple of things I want to achieve out of this presentation. First and foremost, I want to kind of explain or build the awareness of the role of technology in the genocide. As we know, a lot of focus goes into, okay, Israel did this, Israeli Defense Forces did this in Palestine or Gaza, but really, how are they doing it? How the and largely, if not completely, this is being powered through technology. So how does technology enable all of that? What technologies, what applications, what platforms are actually powering all of this genocide? We're going to be talking about that. So I'm going to be talking about not just those technologies, but also though there's like 8 specific companies that are at the forefront of building those technologies which are powering this genocide. So we'll be covering that as well. The second part that I'm going to be talking about essentially is the need for regulations. I think we need to understand that we're not really saying here that technology at its core is evil. What we're trying to build the case for essentially is that if it is not controlled or bound or contained through regulations, essentially it has the potential for global damage. And especially technologies like artificial intelligence really can get out of control to cause a lot of damage if they're not regulated. So I think that's the case that we're trying to build here. The third part is understanding the mindset of war profiteering. So, I mean, we understand there's some political gains that Israel is trying to achieve out of what they're doing in Gaza, but beyond that, I think this is a case of warmongering or war profiteering, where tech companies, in the interest of building or maximizing their profits, are building those technologies which are really contributing or expediting the complete damage or eradication of the Gazan population, as well as can cause damage in other areas if not controlled. There's a very specific or very famous quote that I think that has stayed with me for years, ever since I saw the movie from 2006, Inside Man, which stars Jodie Foster, Clive Owen, Denzel Washington, where Jodie Foster says at one point, when there's blood in the streets, buy property. So what we're really seeing essentially is that interest of making money, or at the core, capitalism at its peak, as we see these companies in the interest of building those technologies to maximize their revenues, are selling those technologies to Israel as well as potentially to other countries and organizations, which can cause a lot of damage as well. So in the interest of profits or maximizing profits, we're seeing that sometimes even bloodshed, warfare are considered as opportunities to maximize their business footprint. So that's the mindset of war profiteering, how companies approach this, why they are so silent, although they know that their technologies are being used for this specific purpose. So we want to understand this specific mindset as well. Quickly looking at the table of contents, essentially this presentation is going to be broken down into 2 sections. One section will be 30 minutes long. The other section will be 30 minutes long. Possibly we'll have to divide it into two separate days, I guess, to cover all of the table of contents, because there's a lot to cover here. But essentially the first section is where I talk about specific technologies which are developed specifically and largely being used in Gaza, but also in West Bank to control, monitor, and cause damage to the population in these specific areas. The section 2 will be covering about those specific 8 tech companies that are the forerunners or just scratching the surface, these specific leaders that are huge, huge companies, very famously known to be building or openly building those technologies or have contracts with the Israeli government and defense forces to build those technologies for them, to enable them to perform what they're doing in the specific region. So section 1 will be covering the Wolfpack mobile application, which essentially comprises of 3 applications, sometimes called the white wolf, the blue wolf, and the red wolf, combinedly called as the Wolfpack mobile applications, which essentially serve a certain purpose. We'll be talking about that. Next, we'll be talking about Maybat 2000 surveillance system, which essentially is a network of cameras which are capturing video data of people in the region, and then feeding it into an AI-driven system, which essentially their AI, the brain behind this whole operation, the Habsora, the gospel, which essentially powers all of this automation, identifies targets, takes input from all of these data sources, and causes the maximum damage, all on automation using artificial intelligence, facial recognition, voice recognition, and other technologies. We'll also look at AI-driven smart shooters, which essentially are enabled through AI and don't even have a certain person sitting behind them and are at the autonomy to actually shoot down whenever they see a threat from a certain person in this specific area. We'll talk about especially we'll look at one slide where you'll see all of these technologies, all of this ecosystem really, how they work together, how they integrate, how they feed all of the data into the Habsora, the gospel platform, which essentially is the brain behind this operation. And from there, they identify targets of civilian infrastructures as well as individuals, list of people that they want to target, and then performing those strikes on those areas or people to cause maximum damage, and then feed the updated data into back the Habsora, the gospel platform. So we'll talk about, or we'll look at the complete ecosystem. And then lastly, we'll talk about essentially how much data they're on a daily basis capturing specifically from Gaza, and what type of operations they are or want to perform on top of that to further improve their systems, and automate this process beyond this stage. The second section obviously will be covering those 8 companies that are building these technologies and what technologies they're building, what type of contracts they have with the Israeli government and the defense forces to enable them further optimize these processes and improve their technologies. So without further ado, let's look at the first application, which essentially is the Wolfpack mobile application suite, which comprises of the first and foremost white wolf application. So white wolf application, if we really try to understand what this is, essentially this is, I guess, the most simple form of technology solution that they have built specifically to monitor and control the movement of Palestinian population in the West Bank. Essentially, what Israel has done is it has introduced over 700,000 Israeli settlers into the West Bank. So when these illegal settlers came into this area, they were provided this white wolf application, which essentially you can see is a mobile application through which they can scan a certain person's picture or take a picture or scan their identification card and then run it by the database that is built by IDF to assess who that person is and also to report where that specific person is right now. So what this is doing is essentially from the ground level, IDF, through its Israeli settlers, is capturing the information of all the Palestinian population and feeding it through the mobile application, the White Wolf, back into their central database where they maintain all of this information about who is who. If there's a certain new person that they see, either this information is fed into the IDF databases through the White Wolf application, or actually they are reported that, hey, this person is not found in the database, so who is he? So they can then look into further that specific person's identity and check who they are. So this is being used by the Israeli settlers to essentially monitor and control the movement of Palestinian population and report back to the IDF, keeping their databases updated. And there's a very famous video, I'm sure you've seen it, where a certain settler comes storming into a house, and the woman screams, "You, this is my house, you cannot take it over." And he says, if I don't steal it, somebody else will steal it. So that really tells you the mindset of these settlers, how they're looking at this. They're really taking over the area, taking over the houses of civilian population, removing them from their houses, monitoring and controlling their movement, all through this White Wolf application. Okay, so next comes the Blue Wolf application. This essentially has more rights than the White Wolf application. This is used not actually by the Israeli settlers. This is actually provided to the Israeli soldiers, and essentially it helps them when they perform mapping raids. So essentially, if they're looking for a certain target, they would storm into a certain residential complex or a certain area in the middle of the night. They can actually perform those raids and actually ask the people to stand in line and then take their pictures, match the details against the database through this smartphone application, and actually see who is who, confirm their identity, keep the databases updated, inform if there's a certain new person found, so on and so forth. And so it helps the Israeli soldiers do more of what the Israeli settlers were doing through the White Wolf application. And then this is also used as this shows more detailed profiles of each Palestinian and their movements through their own soldiers. So they've got like two sources now. One is the settlers using the White Wolf application, and then there is the Israeli soldiers using the Blue Wolf application. And then they reconcile the records of each to see which Palestinian is who and where are they moving, control their movements, so on and so forth. So after the White Wolf and the Blue Wolf application, the most advanced one is the Red Wolf application, which essentially is not just smartphone technology to actually confirm the identity of a person or update those details, but actually is powered by artificial intelligence and facial recognition system and is implemented at checkpoints since 2022. So the Red Wolf application, essentially, there's 849 plus checkpoints across West Bank as of 2025, where there are surveillance cameras mounted at every 300-foot distance, and they're constantly monitoring the video of that area and actually feeding it back to the database. And then this specific application is also powered in the sense that it cannot just look at a picture, but also through a video stream, it can actually pick and identify people. And let's say it identifies a certain threat or a person who is actually on the red list of that specific platform, it can alert the authorities, they can actually arrest that person, so on and so forth. It also auto captures the Palestinian individual's data or pictures or video. It runs query against other checkpoints. So let's say, for example, if a person is not identified, this specific application is also equipped in the sense that it can actually check the data from other checkpoints and see, okay, have you found any information for this specific person, so that they can kind of autonomously and in a more connected way control the population and do the identity check of those people. It also maintains the biometrics of each person of each of the Palestinian population in that specific area. And what it also does is it is very, very useful for IDF to impose harsh restrictions of movements of Palestinians. So essentially, because there are so many checkpoints, sometimes people are denied access from one checkpoint to the other. Sometimes they're withheld for a certain number of hours before they're kind of let go. And this also comes very handy because whenever there are protests against illegal settlements, so this complete video capturing and surveillance data comes very handy to see where the riots or protests are happening and perform arrests and take further actions on top of that. This is a map which actually is taken from a video from Al Jazeera and actually shows us the number of checkpoints and number of settlement and outposts of Israeli defense forces in West Bank. So this is Gaza. As you see, complete eradication has been, or kind of demolition has been happening, or has happened in this specific area. But if you look at the West Bank, you'll notice so many checkpoints, the 850 plus checkpoints that control the movement of people in these areas and really, really restricts the movement of Palestinian population. So combined, the white wolf, the blue wolf, and the red wolf applications are called the wolf pack applications, and they are a very important source of capturing the data of population and controlling the movement of population across West Bank, especially. And if we go to the next slide, we look at the next component, which is the Maybat infrastructure. So Maybat 2000 infrastructure essentially is a network of cameras, actually 1,000 plus CCTV cameras across East Jerusalem, which is continuously monitoring and restoring video surveillance data and actually allowing illegal settlements to expand. Interestingly, the Maybat 2000 system is also combined with smart shooter, AI-driven autonomous shooter technology, which essentially is like these checkpoints that you can see, which are heavily guarded by Israeli authorities, are employed with cameras and different technologies, facial recognition, etc. They're also equipped with these smart shooters, so they can actually, if they identify a certain person which is on the blacklist of a certain person, it can actually identify that person automatically and then shoot that person as well without the intervention of any person or official from the Israeli government. So this is essentially this is the peak of AI being employed in the genocide. Next comes the gospel. So we've spoken at length about the Wolfpack application. We've spoken about the Maybat application. Now, there's the gospel, which is also referred to as Habsora, and which essentially is also called the mass assassination factory. And essentially, it is the brain of the AI-based warfare in Gaza and West Bank. And how this really works essentially is, and I have a slide for this, which will actually summarize all of that, what we've spoken about. It takes input from all of the data being captured by the Maybat 2000 system. It takes input from the Wolfpack applications. It takes input from signal intelligence, other products which are used for voice intercepting, SMS intercepting, and then it also incorporates other aerial surveillance feeds from drones and satellites. And all of this data is actually fed into the gospel. And then using artificial intelligence, there is analysis performed on this tremendous amount of data, which is continuously being fed into the gospel. And as a result of all of this analysis, what this does is it gives the output in two forms. Number one, it gives a list of civilian infrastructure targets which need to be targeted through airstrikes, like, for example, hospitals or schools or healthcare centers, etc., residential complexes, so on and so forth. And then it also gives the output of individuals which are to be targeted. So both infrastructure targets as well as individual targets are actually the output of the gospel. And using this specific platform, the gospel was actually launched by the IDF in 2021 during the 11 days war with Hamas. And even at that point, it was able to identify 100 plus targets per day. So this is how smart this technology is, that it takes input from all of those data sources and applications, and then using artificial intelligence, it actually is able to provide the IDF with 100 plus targets, both civilian infrastructure as well as individuals, of that they can then focus on to kind of destroy and damage. Also, using the cloud technologies and artificial intelligence, using these technologies, what this is really doing is it is delegating the decision making because there's so much of automation. All of this data is integrated. All of these applications work together. So the decision making is really, really very minimal here, and it is automating the execution. That okay, data gets fed from the mobile applications or the Maybach system into the gospel. From there, a target is identified. From there, the drones are informed, okay, here you have to perform the strike. So all of this process almost works autonomously, and this is what we call really an automated genocide. Uh, the mindset behind all of this essentially is one important doctrine which IDF general, one of the IDF generals actually introduced was the Dahiya doctrine, which talks that if we target large scale destruction of in civilian infrastructure, this will eventually pressurize the hostile governments or Hamas essentially to give in or give up and actually give in to come to the negotiation table with Israel. So the Dahiya doctrine is really employed here, that these technologies at our play to essentially automate most of this process. If you look at this article, this is provided in the links, so you can read the gospel, how Israel is using AI to select bombing targets in Gaza. And if you look at the next slide, this really summarizes what we have discussed so far. So we can see in one quick look, all of the white wolf, blue wolf, red wolf being used by the settlers, Israeli soldiers, Israeli authorities to capture the data of Palestinian population and then push it into the Habsora, the gospel. Similarly, the Maybach 2000 system also capturing data and surveillance information from 1,000 plus cameras, putting it into the Habsora. And then signal intelligence products, then drones and satellites. All of this data is being fed into this specific platform. And from there, the Habsora platform is actually able to identify 100 plus targets per day. There was a time it was able to only identify 50 targets per year, but using all of artificial intelligence, cloud technologies, facial recognition, and all of these technologies getting better and better with so much of information being fed into these systems per day, this is now able to identify 100 plus targets per day and has identified 37,000 plus people as potential human targets that Israeli forces then target. Now, these infrastructure targets and the individual target list both are fed into the Israeli Air Force command and operation to perform the airstrikes in those specific infrastructure targets, as well as autonomous drones that are built by those companies that we'll be talking about in section 2 are actually employed to do those precision strikes to specifically target those people that are on the individual target list of these people. And as you can see, this is more or less a whole automated ecosystem which is employed here. And as a result of that, we're seeing what we damage that has been done in the area, that 50,000 plus casualties have been done, 116 plus, 1,000 plus injured, and 50% at least women and children were targeted in Gaza alone. These are conservative numbers. And if you look at the airstrikes, there's 40,000 plus airstrikes conducted, 85,000 plus tons of bombs have been used in Gaza alone to perform the damage that we have been seeing so far. So if we look at this specific ecosystem here, it may be kind of curious to really understand what does it really look like in terms of data. So all of these data sources, the mobile applications, Maybach, drones, satellite, all of this data is being capturing data from this specific region and then feeding it into the hub source. So how is it possible, or what type of technologies are actually employed to perform further analysis on so much of data, right? So I wanted to understand how big of a data are we really talking about here? So unfortunately, I couldn't find specific numbers from data sources reported by Israel or other reputable sources, but I did a search using all of this information that I had found, and actually asked ChatGPT to give me some estimation or reference of how much data is being captured from Gaza alone on a daily basis. And what this did was that I provided the data source like drones, the Maybach system, the phone data, social media, geolocation, SIM tracking, and all of these data combined, what estimations ChatGPT gave me was that there's approximately, conservatively speaking, 30 to 65 terabytes of data being captured on a daily basis from these data sources, and then being fed into the gospel and other data sources on which the Israeli government and forces perform further action. So as you can see, 30 to 65 terabytes is not a small number, but just to set things in perspective, I wanted to give this example that if you want to understand the daily amount of data that is being captured here, one way to look at it is, let's say, for example, 1 hour of Netflix high definition video streaming is of the size of 3 GB. So let's say if we talk about 30 terabytes to 65 terabytes of data, essentially we're talking that Israel is capturing just from Gaza alone 10,000 hours of video to up to 21,000 hours of video every single day. And this is, if you want to put this into context, is like somebody sitting down and watching 2.5 years of high definition Netflix video every single day. That is how much of this data is being populated and captured through these data sources. So I think at this stage, we've covered a lot about the data sources of the data, the technology being employed, and then how further action is performed on this specific data by the Israeli Defense Forces. And I think next step really is to understand out of this data, what is next coming up? So, what type of contracts, what type of technologies Israel is now building? And that's where all of this presentation ties into the tech companies, because there's like 8 companies specifically which have employed or are at the forefront of building those technologies that will enable Israel to take further actions on top of all of this huge amount of data that they're capturing on a daily basis. And that is what we will be covering in section number 2. We'll cover which companies are employed or have contracts with the Israeli government, what type of contracts they are, what type of technologies they're building, and we'll cover all of that in the section number 2.